And welcome to the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. In this episode, we are joined by Ann Butera, the president of the Whole Person Project, an organizational development consulting firm. Diana and Ann do a deep dive into the relationship between a person's conversation skill level and the associated value of their communication currency. They also have a great discussion about what Ann refers to as COVIDity, where the current COVID era challenges each of our soft skills. Lastly, they talk about confidence and the technique of fake it till you feel it. Now, let's have a conversation.
Welcome, everybody, to the Soft Skills Salon podcast, an audible think tank on soft skills. I'm your host, Diana Kowarski. As I say, conversation is the currency of communication. So let's have a conversation. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to acknowledge, invite, and celebrate Ann Butera, who I like to call friend as well as expert. Ann is the president and of the Whole Person Project, Inc., which is an organization and development consulting firm that has for many years been successful in enabling professionals to do their jobs better. They are known for providing practical advice, and Ann is a frequent speaker at industry conferences. She's the author of 5 Tiers of Audit Competency and Say What? Communicate with Tact and Impact. Ann, I am thrilled that you have afforded us this time. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I am so happy to be here, Diana. And you pronounced that book title perfectly. Perfectly. You got where I was going with the title. Say what? Absolutely. Communicate with tact and impact. But thanks for the invitation.
My pleasure. And I'm, if anything, a real stickler around some grammatical pieces. So this is an audible think tank, and there is both an exclamation mark and a question mark at the end of say what. So I was just being true to your intent. And absolutely. So we have a couple of questions that I thought were great choices on your part. The first that we're going to start our conversation on is, what is your understanding of the phrase, conversation is the currency of communication? What are your thoughts, Ann?
You know, I loved the phrase when I saw it. First of all, I love the alliteration in it. You know, the C is conversation, is the currency of communication. And it got me thinking immediately that currencies, you know, there are different currencies, and a currency has different values. And that made me start to think about communication. And we can have different kinds of communication. We can have communication where I'm giving you information. We can have communication where I'm trying to get information from you. We can have communication where I'm trying to convince you of something.
Right.
You see where I'm going with it. So I started thinking, the same way that countries have different currencies, people have different currencies. You know, they approach it a little bit differently. So I also started thinking, this was very provocative, you can tell. But I also started thinking, when do we use currency? We use currency to get something. So I go into a store and I want something. You know, I want that cup of tea, that bottle of wine, that box of chocolates, not necessarily all in that order, by the way. And in return, I give a currency. So I think about the words that we use as part of the currency. I think about the inflection or tonal inflection, like that say what, you know, that is a form of a currency. And we're doing that with others to get something. And it goes back to either getting information, we're making a point, we're convincing somebody. So that was, I guess, my last comment was the idea of a conversation. Traditionally, in my mind, a conversation is an exchange. So you say something and it prompts me to say something. And then what I say evokes something in you. And we're doing this exchange. And in this case, we'd be exchanging words or exchanging currency. So that was my long answer.
Not at all. There's some great stuff in there, Anne. Thank you. And I believe it was it tea, coffee, and wine that
Yes.
were your products.
Chocolate. We got chocolate. Tea, no coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker. So it was tea, wine, and chocolate.
Tea, wine, and chocolate. Good to know. I'm going to make notes. Tea, wine, and
the tea and the wine kind of cancel each other out, but the chocolate stays.
Fair enough. I don't know if tea and wine canceling each other out is a scientific perspective, but I appreciate it as both a wine drinker and chocolate consumer myself. I'm with you. I loved that you got to the point where we were looking at exchange and, conversation being the currency of communication is, I think, at its very core, pardon me, perhaps I know at its very core about that exchange, which to your point isn't necessarily reciprocal at times, right? At times we're looking to influence, at times we're looking to be understood, at times we're looking to clarify. And there's so much that we as trainers, and you and I have both spent a lot of time in working with groups and or individuals over the years, and how it is they make choices as individual communicators and whole teams. There's so much there about that small little unit of the conversation that at times can get swept into some of our macro thinking about making the world a better place or how our culture as an organization might even be organized. So I love the fact that, looking at how it is that we have these different currencies as individuals, as you said, can result in these different conversations. And there's so much there that we can learn and unlearn and relearn in that unit of the conversation, right? So the next question that you chose, I think, is a really great one. And it's asking us in a timely way. It says, how do you compare pre-COVID soft skills to moving beyond COVID soft skills at work? And if I may, Anne, before I invite your answer, in crafting this question, I fully admit I had a lot of struggle in trying to refer to the COVID era, and perhaps even being a bit starry-eyed, wanting to suggest post-COVID. I know that that's not an official term, but it's maybe a state of mind for some of us. So going back to the question, how do you compare pre-COVID to perhaps where we are now in terms of soft skills at work?
So by the way, I call it COVIDity. That's what I call it, because it's kind of like I don't know, a pervasive feeling. It's not quite anything. It's kind of amorphous, but it definitely affects how we approach things. I think when I think about it, I think pre-COVID and post with all the COVIDity, people's lives have been, all of our lives have been irrevocably changed. So what I'm looking at is pre-COVID, we took a lot of communication for granted. I think there were a lot of in-person verbal cues that we perceived at some level. We responded to, maybe not, at some level, but we definitely took them for granted. Something like as simple as pre-COVID, as simple as if you were in a meeting, because your choices would be on the phone or be in a meeting. And to another extent, if you were global, I think you had more of the video, but you didn't really see it as video. You saw it as, okay, it's special. We're going into this meeting room. We're going to have this teleconference. It was very elaborate, just very different. We took for granted, I think, eye contact. We took for granted that we understood where others' eye contact was, what it was focused on. Now that we're in this COVIDity, and by the way, I think we transitioned into it because I do think there was a period where there were people in darkness. There were people who worked for organizations that did not give them cameras. So because pre-COVID, they didn't need cameras.
Right.
And it was difficult for a portion of the population to realize, oh, wow, I need a camera and what to do with a camera. And then, of course, we had all the lighting issues, the backlighting, which puts your face in the dark, the over front lit, and you look like, you can't even see your features because you're so brightly lit. The side lighting that makes you look like part of a lunar eclipse. You can't see half the face in the shade. I think we all got to be our own little movie producer and start to, look at this. And
Right.
so now we're in this state where we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure out how do we get people back. And I think that's a little bit of a distraction right now. So to focus on, well, what are we going to need? I don't think the skills that we learned are going to go away. I think we're going to continue to need to be mindful of our lighting, our backgrounds. I think we're going to need to be mindful of learning how to get intimate when you're on the opposite end of a computer. I think there were a couple of skills that were born out of this COVIDity, and they will stay because I don't see everyone ever back to the office all at the same time. So I see this hybrid model taking root. I really do. So that was a long answer to the soft skills are migrating is really what I'm getting at.
And I think that's a great way of summarizing that there is a migration going on. And some of what you mentioned early on was a physical migration. And I would echo your experience. There was more than one group who I worked with in 2020 who had been working with a desktop computer who suddenly no longer was at that desk and found themselves rapidly up-ramping their skills with a laptop that had a built-in webcam. And then by late 2020, hopefully there was some comfort there. And that was a tough challenge for some of us, because of course, this is also during a pandemic where, our mental health as a planet had been challenged as perhaps never before. And at that level, that suddenly, to your point, not only am I now using this webcam, I need to curate the space in which I am presenting myself rather than turning on the camera and letting the chips fall where they may. I'm suddenly in a position to acknowledge that the entire package, whether it is how I'm offering eye contact, as you suggested, or what it is that is visible in my space, is now suddenly a part of how I'm perceived by others. And oftentimes we can dismiss soft skills as not necessarily being true to our purposefulness or our deliberateness. And I would say to you, one of the themes I hear in your answer, Ann, is that you can't accidentally bump into somebody in the hallway anymore, that you're turning on the webcam or your camera, and there's a real opportunity there to curate, to select both your relationship with that camera or webcam, and also what it is that you're offering in terms of the entire shot. As you said, we're now producers, cinematographers, directors, all of that in one.
You just said something, and I that sparked a thought. Early research coming in on, this is post COVID start, is that people who are in the office are smarter than the people who are working from home. And the reason that perception, the research is saying, the reason that perception exists is because the people who are in the office are able to overhear conversations, or they're able to see something or people talking, and it gives them subliminal ideas. Okay. So what are the ramifications for those working from home? Obviously, it's not that the people in the office are smarter. That's ridiculous. It is, though, that I think the work from homers need to realize that They have to actively make time to simulate that drive-by, that drop-in, that, oh gosh, I ran into you in the pantry. To give you an idea, I reached out last week to a colleague and we scheduled time to talk. I hadn't spoken to her in, God, it had to be at least a year. And during the course of this conversation, she said to me, so what's up? What do you need? And I said, I really just needed to hear your voice. No, really, what did you need? You can tell me. I said, no, sincerely. I just wanted to just chat. We haven't talked in a while. And there was this pause. And she was like, well, I'm glad that you did. And so what I'm saying is we need to do that. We need to find either we use Slack or we use something. Preferably, I would turn on the camera and just, hear, talk, something. Yeah. Simulate that drop-in.
It reminds me of the invention of cubicles, which, 1960s, it was Robert Propst. I always mispronounce his name. It's Propst, Propst. And his whole idea was an echo or perhaps a foreshadowing of your suggestion around the serendipitous conversation or the casual encounter where we can make these perhaps obvious, either overt or covert connections of, oh, I can put that together with that, or, building these connections. And the idea of cubicles was that we would be able to hear each other and potentially just walk by someone's desk and say, oh, you're writing a report on project 123. I think I could be of value to project 123. We don't have that anymore. And you're right. So in this COVIDity, which is a term I am going to use, and I will give you due credit, Ann, every time I do.
Thank you.
COVIDity, right? We perhaps are even a bit suspicious now when we are intentionally reaching out, as you just suggested with that colleague of yours, without there being a clear purpose, because everything is a meeting request all of a sudden, right? And if everything is a meeting request, well, psychologically, there's got to be a purpose to this. And if the purpose is, I haven't heard you, laugh in a while, or I haven't had a chance to, see how you're doing, we can be a bit suspect because of the use of the technology and being geographically dispersed. So there's something there that maybe we are learning, but maybe have opportunity to unlearn in a way as well, I think, sometimes when it comes to this.
And one other point about that, unlearning behavior. There were many folks with the conference call etiquette, and the rule was silence until the meeting began. Silence, Right. And now what I'm finding, and I don't know if you're finding the same thing, that if I'm starting a session, I start talking with the first person who signs on and simulating that conversation that we would have, where we might be talking about how was your commute in? Well, obviously there's no commute in. So now the conversation is around, gee, that's an interesting background. Where did you get that? Did you take that picture? Where is that from? By the way, not asking all of those questions, so rapid fire. But then people join, and then being able to say, for those of you that just joined, we're talking about blah, blah, blah. What's your experience with blah, blah, blah? So it's different behaviors that we're doing. And the ice break, I think, is becoming more and more important to set the tone, set that energy level, and encourage people to talk to each other, not be so dependent on, that traditional, oh, the trainer is speaking, or, oh, the meeting leader is speaking, and I've got to wait, So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. And from the group leader perspective, and I know that's a space that you and I share in our work, at the start of a Zoom session, I'm absolutely engaging with anyone who's there, trying to mimic what I would have done in person. And I'm keeping an eye on the waiting room, and I'm making sure that the Wi-Fi isn't going down. And all of a sudden I'm multitasking, which I have to say, one of the learning curves for me has been, being the wizard behind the curtain and being in front of the curtain at the same time, because I agree with you. It is in those initial moments that we are looking for some of the psychological safety, perhaps in an icebreaker or of points of connection that this COVID era, while we are geographically dispersed, has lent itself to one person at a time speaking, which isn't necessarily, to be frank, optimal at all times. And I even make the offer, especially if I have a group of about a dozen people or less, I'll make the offer, if at any point in time during our session, you have a thought, a question, an idea, a comment that you are interested in vocalizing, please spontaneously unmute. You are welcome to do so. This is a sincere offer. It does mean you and I will probably overspeak for a nanosecond. However, I will stop talking.
I do the same thing. I do exactly the same thing because I'm going for the same thing you're going for. I want to get as close to that conversation that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
And you can't hold your thought forever. Do you know what I mean? At some point, even if you remember it, the timing of when you express it, it's going to be stale. So rather than have them wait until, I stop, which God knows, that could be never.
And I would say to you, stale is one, possibility, and the other is fermentation. Mm-hmm. And I'm very aware in those possibilities, neither of which are preferable, that if you've got a comment, a question, an idea, or if it's not necessarily relevant even to the content, but the audio isn't working or, something, let me know. But it is this COVIDity era that one person speaks at a time, always, apparently, because of the nature of these video platforms, which has, some implications around conversations and our conversation skills, as you're suggesting. Absolutely. So I have a next question that I have to say is one of my personal favorites from the questionnaire that if I had opportunity to lay a bet, I knew you would select. And I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased that you did. I love being right. I have to admit it, but I knew you would have a kinship with this. And that is, how do you define confidence?
The reason I chose the question is because it's actually been on my mind. So you know that in my work, I basically deconstruct behavior. So for example, who's the best performer on your team? And I figure out what makes them the best performer on your team. What is it that they are doing? Now, let's face it, I can't crack open the person's head and read their minds, but behaviorally, I can notice things. For example, I can notice that the person is always early, or I can notice that the person is very methodical. I can notice what the person does first, second, third. So it has been on my mind to figure out behaviorally what is confidence. And I started to approach it first by the process of elimination. So what is it not? What is it not?
Okay.
Confidence is not second guessing yourself. Mm-hmm. Confidence is not hesitation. And hesitation to the point where you don't finish a thought. Hesitation to the point where you make one statement, it's good, but it's really, well, maybe it might not be so good. So the two parts of your statement kind of cancel each other out. I started then thinking, okay, so I could keep doing the process of elimination, by the way. Some people don't speak at all. Right. Some people, they don't speak audibly. That you hear maybe half a syllable and you're straining to hear. And we all know when you're straining to hear someone, you just don't keep trying. So it got me to what makes people trust in themselves. And part of what equals the trust equals accuracy and experience. And if you're accurate, then you feel good about that. You believe yourself. You believe yourself more. If you've got an experience, whether it's positive or negative, preferably positive, but you've learned something, you now have a truth, you now have a fact, And that makes you feel more confident. So that's my answer to, how do I define confidence?
I love that. And the negation in terms of delayering of trying to get to it. I often will mimic that in my own thinking. And you certainly are so skilled at deconstructing behaviors. And I've seen you in action in doing that, Anne. So I love that you brought that to everyone's attention. I hear some echoes of my own thoughts in your answers. And what I've concluded of late, and I can't tell you that this is static. It's quite dynamic for me because, well, it's part of soft skills and the work that I do on a daily basis. And I sort of like it. So let me just tell you this. I've concluded so far that confidence is a feeling. And I'm theorizing that it's a feeling along with sleepy, dopey, happy, or any of the other feelings that we're capable of. And that we mistakenly assume that asserting ourselves is actually confidence, when what I'm suggesting is that confidence, this feeling, increases post asserting ourselves. As you suggested, whether or not it's particularly positive or effective. I'm not saying you have to jump out of a plane. And if one does, I hope they do it safely and all that great stuff. It might just be, as you also suggested, opening up your mouth and saying a word in a Zoom conference or in a Zoom training session when you wouldn't have said a word previously. I'm pretty sure that it is the product or the yield of some assertion, some interpersonal risk that we then gain the feeling of confidence. And so I'm not sure, and I'm sure you've heard about, the idea of power poses that has been very popular in the past, or, working up your courage and then asserting yourself. This is my latest thinking. I think it might be the inverse relationship. What do you think?
I call that, by the way, fake it till you feel it. I'm not so sure. You just keep standing there with your hands on your hips. And at some point, that feeling of power is just going to come charging up your arms and into your heart.
Sure it is.
Oh, gosh, say anything enough times and it becomes true. I don't know if that's true. Although that is the basis for positive affirmations, right? That is the basis for having a positive mindset as opposed to a negative mindset to get you in that mode, to get you. But I also think, I do think that the feeling is based on some action. You're linking it to the assertion or maybe a result of having asserted oneself. Right. I'm likening it to, I'm aligning it with data. You have a fact, something, and the fact that what you know is true, or it's advice that has worked, and you share it, and somebody says thank you, that increases your confidence because it's a fact and you're getting a response on it.
Ann, I'm going to noodle that. I'm going to think about that more because I honestly believe that knowledge-based perspective, whether it, as you suggested, it's through experience or through data, that's a part of this equation. I had honestly not isolated that previously. There's something there. The
reason I say that is because I am truly a behavioralist. And so the feeling is not going to come out of the thin air. So there will be some kind of stimulus response relationship there. And depending on it, the more they're positive, the more the confidence will increase faster. If they're negative, there'll have to be some relearning, like what do I need to change? What do I need to do differently? But there'll still be a confidence there. Like, I'm confident that doesn't work. I tried it, it doesn't work.
Right. And it's not necessarily a positive incline in terms of knowledge acquisition. You're right. And to your own modeling, it might be disqualifying what are the possibilities and coming to what you'd prefer. Just like, not knowing how to define confidence, but knowing necessarily what it's not.
Exactly.
At the beginning. Yeah.
I do think, by the way, though, knowing what something is not only takes you so far. At some point, once you've used that, I use that approach to kind of get some traction on the idea. It's like that process of elimination. Mm-hmm. And so now when I feel like, okay, I've isolated enough different things that it's not, I'm now ready to look at what remains and now start to articulate. Because I do think when people give advice and they say, don't put beans in your ears to the little kid eating, what is that kid going to do? He's going to put the beans in his ears, because the don't, and research has shown, the more you say to people, don't do something, like don't smoke, and people go smoke. Don't, the more they say the don't, we've got to get the messages to a positive, especially for coaching ramifications, for development ramifications. So, the don't just takes you so far.
You're absolutely right. And although I have to say, I have not heard that specific advice with don't, it's sound advice. The beans in your ears. And perhaps coaching or coachable moment there is, please consider eating the beans, right? Please eat the beans. Yeah. Beans are good. Try one, right? There's lots of different ways of getting there. Absolutely. And always a privilege and a pleasure in connecting with you. I know you have a fantastic website. Do you want to remind everybody about it?
Yeah. If you like what we were talking about today and you'd like to see more or read more, check out www.wholepersonproject.com. And that's whole with a WHOLE personproject.com. We've got some videos, we've got some articles, and we welcome you to come and visit. Diana, thank you so much for this opportunity. Great to spend time chatting with you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. And as I do with all of our guests, Ann has provided us potential future guests. So I'm going to give a shout out right now to Otley Bell, who I will be reaching out to, who I'm certain as a reference from you will also be a fantastic resource for this podcast. Thank you so much again, Ann. This was fantastic. And hopefully we can do it again sometime soon. A real delight. Everyone, wholepersonproject.com. Absolutely fantastic. And thanks again. Next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode. And remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.